Sleepy buddy, how are you tonight? Remember one thing, SleepyToons loves you. Take a slow, cozy breath and let your shoulders relax. Now tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? Tonight, we're drifting into a brand new adventure. Courage meets the Powerpuff Girls. Under a soft moon above nowhere, our timid pink pup is about to cross paths with three bright little heroes and their kindly professor. Settle in, snuggle deeper, and let's wander into this calm, playful night together. Okay, let's begin. Picture the farmhouse, quiet as a secret. The porch boards cooled by night air, a rocking chair still as a held breath. Inside, Muriel sleeps peacefully. Eustace's hat rests on a peg like a small, snoring hill. Outside, the sky wears silver, a round, patient moon, and 1,000 sleepy stars. Our friend Courage steps under the sand with careful paws. One, then another. A tiny hush with every footprint. Let's breathe like Courage. In a soft nose breath for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out. A warm sigh for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again. In for 4. Out for 6. Courage blinks at the moon. His ears twitch. He listens to the crickets. We breathe with him again. In for 4. Out for 6. Every exhale loosens the day, loosens the thoughts, loosens the little knots behind the eyes. The air smells faintly of dust and dandelions, and something else. A sweet hint, like cotton candy clouds far away. A windmill turns slowly, the blades crossing the moon with a gentle shush. Shush, shush. Somewhere a screen door clicks softly, politely, and then stops. Courage looks out across the open land. The night is friendly. Even the shadows look sleepy. He's nervous sometimes. He's Courage, and he still trembles. That's okay. You can be brave and tremble at the same time. He tells himself the smallest things, one paw, then the next, one breath, then the next. Let's echo him now. One paw, then the next. One breath, then the next. I am safe, and the night is kind. He takes 3 steps forward. We breathe with him. In 4, out 6. He takes 3 more. In 4, out 6. The windmill whispers, "You are not alone." A new sound threads through the air, a soft humming. Not 1 note, but 3, braided together like the colors of a ribbon. The tune is playful, but calm. It's not calling loudly, it's inviting gently. Courage tilts his head. We listen too. The first note is bright as a small smile. The second note is airy, like bubbles drifting from a straw. The third note is steady, a heartbeat with a bow. Together they sound like do, da, dee. Not quite words, but welcoming. Courage looks back at the farmhouse, making sure the porch is still safe. It is. He steps toward the humming. The sand holds his paw prints like little moons. The sky feels larger here, but also closer, like a soft blanket pulled up over the world. Do-da-dee-om. The 3 notes bloom again, a little clearer. Courage takes another breath in 4, and out 6. He nods to himself. I can go a little farther. You can say it with him. I can go a little farther. Let's make the body comfortable, just like Courage settling into the night. Unwrinkle the forehead. Let the eyes become heavy stones in a warm river. Unstick the tongue from the roof of the mouth. Let the neck lengthen, as if the crown of the head could float. The chest widens on an inhale and settles on an exhale. The belly softens like a relaxed smile. Hips sink into support. Knees release. Ankles and feet feel pleasantly heavy, like the earth is holding them. In for 4, out for 6. Courage pads onward, matched to your breath. The fence posts to Courage's right look like sleepy soldiers, caps of pale paint glowing under moonlight. A tumbleweed decides to rest too, curled up against a stone, done rolling for the day. A moth drifts by, tracing lazy figure eights, then changes its mind and makes gentle O's instead. Courage watches the moth, and the moth watches Courage, and they both agree to let the night be easy. Do-da-dee. The melody returns, softer now, like it's waiting rather than wandering. Courage thinks, I can be careful and curious. I can be small and strong. I can feel scared and still step forward. If any of those feel good, borrow one and tuck it in your pocket. We breathe, in 4, out 6. The wind keeps the time. Shush, shush, shush. Far ahead, the sand holds a faint glow, like sugar sprinkled on bread at dawn. It isn't the farmhouse light. It isn't the truck. It's something soft. Slightly blue, slightly green, slightly pink. Oh, Courage pauses, not frozen, just thoughtful. He listens. The 3 notes hum again, and this time they feel like welcome. He nods, tiny, brave, adorable. We all take one more step with him inside the story. Let's climb a gentle breath ladder the way Courage gathers himself. In for 4, out for 6. In for 5, out for 7. In for 6, out for 8. Hold nothing, force nothing. Everything is allowed to be easy. Courage's tail gives a small wag like a punctuation mark at the end of a calm sentence. As he draws closer, Courage sees the glow brighten, then soften, as if it's breathing too. The blue glow sketches a gentle arc in the night air. The green glow twinkles like dew on grass. The pink glow warms like a friendly blush. Do-da-ah. The notes hover above the sand, patient as lanterns. Courage's ears perk. His paws make the tiniest crunches. He whispers a little sound, half gulp, half greeting. The night understands. Let's pause with him. Inside, name 3 things that feel safe. Perhaps your blanket, your breath, this story. Name 2 things you're grateful for. Small things count the most. Name 1 thing you can soften right now. Maybe your shoulders, your brow, your jaw. The windmill turns once more. Shush. And the moon smiles its patient, silver smile. At the edge of the glow, Courage sees 3 little silhouettes above the sand. They're not loud. They're not rushing. They hover with the hush of bedtime and the promise of kindness. A ribbon bow catches the moon, pink and tidy. A bright, bubbly giggle floats out, quickly turning into a gentle hush, as if to say, we can be calm, too. Another silhouette crosses her arms, confident, but tonight, relaxed, almost sleepy strong. The melody answers Courage like a question turning into a welcome. Do-da-dee, then softer, do-ah. Courage steps close enough to feel the warmth of the glow on his whiskers. His tail does the tiniest wag again. He breathes in 4, out 6, and the night breathes with him. The glow swayed softly, waiting for him. From its center, 3 shapes began to take form, their edges rounding and smoothing until they looked less like lights and more like tiny girls, each cradled in her own gentle color. The one in pink floated forward first, bow gleaming under the moon. She smiled a quiet, steady smile, as though she'd been standing guard over this moment for a long time. Beside her hovered a figure in blue, soft and bright-eyed, holding her hands together as if to catch the breeze. A third, wrapped in green, lingered just behind, her stance easy but alert, a watchful friend even in stillness. Courage blinked. unsure if he should hide or wag or speak. A small sound escaped his throat, half question, half hello. The girls tilted their heads in perfect unison, calm and kind. "Hello there," the pink one said, a voice smooth as warm tea. "You must be Courage." Courage's ears twitched at the way she spoke his name, gentle and sure, as though she had always known it. The blue one drifted closer, her glow brushing his fur. "We didn't mean to startle you," she said, every syllable light as feathers. "We heard someone walking under the moon and thought we'd see who it was." The green one gave a small nod, crossing her arms with an easy grin. "And we don't usually meet brave pups out here at night," she added, though her voice stayed low, careful not to disturb the quiet. Courage's tail made another shy wag. He tried to bark, but it came out a whispering yelp. The girls chuckled, soft and short, not laughing at him, only sharing the sweetness of the moment. They floated a little higher, then settled again, their lights dimming to match the peace of the plains. The moonlight painted them in silver edges. They looked like bedtime stories come alive. Blossom, for that was the pink one's name, extended her hand toward him, palm open, patient. "It's all right," she murmured. "We're friends." Courage edged nearer, paws quiet against the sand. The warmth from her glow reached him fully now, a calm that wrapped around his chest like a soft blanket. Bubbles, the blue one, leaned close to peer at his face. "Look at those ears," she said with a little laugh, sweet and low. "You're even cuter than the professor described." Buttercup raised an eyebrow, but her smile betrayed her affection. "Yeah, well, cute and gutsy, that's a solid combo," she said. "He came all the way out here, didn't he?" Courage blinked between them, unsure how to answer, and gave a quiet nod instead. The gesture was enough. Above, the stars shifted in their endless dance, opening a patch of sky just wide enough to let a deeper breeze wander through. It curled around them, cool but gentle, stirring their shapes so that they shimmered like lanterns. For a time, no one spoke. They simply stood or floated together, letting the night hold them. The windmill turned far behind, slow and faithful, and somewhere a nightbird trilled one note, soft and clear. Bubbles finally broke the silence, her tone still hushed. "Would you like to come with us for a little walk?" she asked. "It's quieter just past that hill. We can tell you why we're here." Courage looked toward the hill. She pointed at a smooth rise where the moonlight pooled like silver water. He felt a tiny knot of nervousness and a larger wave of curiosity. The warmth of their lights soothed him, as did the easy rhythm of their voices. He nodded once, bravely, and the girls' smiles widened, bright but never harsh. Blossom turned, leading the way at an unhurried pace. Bubbles hovered close by Courage's side, and Buttercup drifted at his other flank, steady and watchful. Together they began to move, a quiet procession, across the fields of nowhere, their shadows stretching long and soft behind them. Every few steps, the melody returned, a barely there tune, do, da, dee, like a heartbeat they all shared. It carried them forward toward stories waiting beyond the rise, where moonlight promised still more gentle surprises. They reached the crest of the hill, paws and small shoes pressing quietly into the sand. From up here, nowhere looked even softer, a stretch of silver plain stitched with thin shadows, all held beneath the slow-turning stars. The farmhouse behind them was only a faint shape, a sleepy reminder of home. Blossom slowed, letting the breeze settle around them. "This is the perfect place to pause," she said, her voice a calm ribbon the night. "You can see everything without the world feeling too big." Courage sat back on his haunches, ears twitching in every direction. He felt both small and safe at once, like the sky had made room just for them. Bubbles floated down beside him, her glow brightening the grass at their feet. She traced little circles in the air, each one spilling soft blue light. Buttercup stretched lazily, arms folding behind her head. "We don't always get nights like this," she murmured. "Even heroes need quiet sometimes." Blossom turned toward Courage, bow catching the moon. "We came out here because we sensed something kind in the breeze," she explained. "It led us across the fields, right to you." Courage's eyes widened a fraction. He tilted his head, a low, questioning sound rising from his throat. Bubbles smiled. "We weren't sure what we'd find," she said, "but we hoped it would be someone who understood what it's like to be brave, even when your knees shake." Buttercup chuckled softly. "Looks like we got lucky." They sat together in an easy hush. The wind moved around them, slipping past Courage's fur, curling under the girl's ribbons and boots. Somewhere close by, a tumbleweed decided to settle for the night, and a lone cricket tried a sleepy song before falling quiet again. Courage lowered himself onto the sand, paws tucked neatly under his chest. He felt their warmth on either side. Bubbles to the left, Buttercup to the right, Blossom just ahead like three small campfires holding the dark at bay. His tail flicked once, then rested. Blossom spoke again, slow and deliberate. "The professor was working late," she said. "He was building something meant to help people sleep, a gentle machine that could soothe busy minds. But it needed to be tested somewhere calm." Bubbles nodded. "When we thought of quiet places, we thought of nowhere." Buttercup smirked, but kept her voice soft. "And of course, if anything strange happened out here, you'd know how to handle it." Courage gave a little squeak of surprise, half flattered, half uncertain, but their smiles kept him steady. They began to talk about small things, what the professor liked to drink before bed, the sound of Muriel humming in her kitchen, the way a moonbeam could look like a silver ladder if you stared long enough. Laughter drifted between them like feathers, never sharp, always warm. After a while, Blossom rose to her feet, brushing imaginary dust from her dress. "Shall we keep going?" she asked, her voice just above a whisper. "The night is still wide, and there's a place near the windmill where the stars look close enough to touch." Courage stood too, his body moving with more confidence than before. Bubbles offered him an encouraging grin, while Buttercup gave a small nod of approval. Together they turned from the hilltop and continued their journey, a pink dog and three gentle heroines, walking side by side through moonlit sand. Above them, the melody returned quiet, steady, wrapping around their footsteps like a lullaby. The night welcomed them deeper, its silver paths unfolding ahead, ready to reveal whatever kindnesses waited just beyond the next breeze. They walked together through the silver fields, their shadows drifting long and easy behind them. The windmill rose ahead, tall against the moon, its arms turning with a slow, patient hush. Each creak felt like part of an old lullaby, a song the land had always known. Blossom guided them toward the base, where a patch of grass grew soft and cool. She settled there, smoothing the folds of her dress against the ground. Bubbles spun lightly in the air before landing, cross-legged, her glow fading to a tender mist. Buttercup stayed standing for a moment, scanning the horizon, then crouched beside Courage with a contented sigh. Courage lay down at last, paws tucked, tail curling close. He felt the warmth of their lights settle around him like a small protective circle. For the first time all evening, the nervous tremor in his belly began to fade. Blossom spoke in her calm, clear way. "The professor likes to come here when he needs quiet ideas," she said. He says the stars above nowhere remind him that every invention begins with stillness. Bubbles giggled softly. Once he stayed up all night trying to build a pillow that could sing bedtime stories. She tilted her head, blue eyes shining. It only worked on squirrels, but they had the nicest dreams. Buttercup rolled her eyes with affection. Yeah, and then we had a squirrel choir hanging out in our backyard. She looked at Courage, a playful smile tugging at her lips. You'd have barked at them all night. Courage let out a tiny chuff, almost a laugh. The sound surprised him, light and easy, not the shaky bark he'd expected. Bubbles clapped her hands once, pleased. They leaned back to watch the sky. The moon, fat and pale, watched over them, while stars scattered across the dark like sugar on velvet. A soft breeze rustled the grass, carrying scents of sweet clover and faint smoke from the farmhouse chimney far away. Blossom traced patterns overhead with one finger, connecting stars into shapes only she could see. That one looks like a teacup, she murmured. And over there's a lantern. Bubbles pointed to a bright cluster near the horizon. That's a puppy, see the ears? Buttercup followed their gaze and shrugged, but her voice stayed warm. Looks more like a frying pan to me. But hey, pans can be brave too. Courage's gaze wandered from star to star, then down to the windmill, then back to his companions. The quiet between them felt rich, not empty, the kind of silence that lets the heart breathe. After a while, Blossom began to tell a story about a night when the girls tried to help the professor fix a telescope. Bubbles kept slipping on the roof tiles, and Buttercup pretended not to care, though she hovered nearby to catch her. Their laughter, even retold, was soft and steady, like water running over smooth stones. Courage listened, tail giving a gentle wag now and then. He thought about Muriel and how she would have loved to hear these tales. He imagined her rocking on the porch, smiling as he sat among new friends under the moon. Bubbles leaned closer, resting her chin on her hands. You know, she said, voice almost a whisper, sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting monsters. It's letting someone sit next to you when you're scared. She offered Courage a tender smile. Buttercup nodded slowly. Yeah, standing guard is good, but sharing the guard is better. Blossom gathered their words with a quiet nod. That's why we came, she said. To remind anyone who wanders that they're not alone. Courage looked at them, at the soft curve of the windmill against the sky, at the moon watching from above. A calm settled deep in his chest, a steady warmth where fear used to sit. Together they lay back on the grass, eyes on the stars. The melody hummed faintly once more, weaving through the cool air, threading every heart to the next. In that gentle weave, the night promised that there would always be light waiting in the stillness and friends waiting in the glow. They stayed under the windmill for a long, calm while, letting the silver hush of the night wash over them. The blades turned lazily above, each slow sweep carving little arcs through the stars. A field mouse peeked out from a nearby tuft of grass, sniffed the air, and decided these new visitors were far too peaceful to disturb. It curled back up in its nest. Bubbles unfolded a soft square of fabric from somewhere inside her dress. It shimmered faintly, blue and white like a patch of sky. She spread it on the ground and patted the spot beside her. Picnic blanket, she whispered. Though there was no food, only the promise of comfort. Courage hesitated, then climbed on, paws sinking into the gentle weave. Blossom settled across from him, smoothing her skirt with small, precise movements. Buttercup flopped down without ceremony, folding her hands behind her head. They formed a circle around the dog, their lights fading to a quiet halo so the stars above could shine. For a few moments no one spoke. They listened to the breeze hum through the windmill, to a sleepy cricket calling once, then twice. The silence wasn't heavy. It felt like the inside of a lullaby. At last, Blossom began to talk, her voice steady and soft. She told them about nights at the professor's lab when the smell of cocoa drifted through the halls and tools clicked gently on workbenches. She described how he liked to pause and watch the sky before bed, sketching constellations in the margins of his notebooks. Bubbles joined in, remembering a time they tried to make a nightlight that glowed with happy memories. We wanted people to see their best moments when they couldn't sleep, she said. But it ended up showing everything, even funny accidents like the day Buttercup slipped on a banana peel. Buttercup groaned but couldn't hide a small laugh. That was a tactical slip, she muttered, though her voice was too drowsy to sound convincing. Courage let the stories wrap around him. He felt warmth in his chest, a gentle pulse that matched the rhythm of the girls' voices. He thought of Muriel, the way she read him bedtime tales in her kitchen voice, low and kind. The thought didn't sting. It soothed, like a hand on his back. Bubbles looked at him, eyes shining soft as dew. "Do you have a favorite bedtime story?" she asked. Courage tilted his head, ears drooping in thought. He gave a quiet, hesitant bark, a memory surfacing. Muriel rocking in her chair, telling him about a shepherd who led stars back to their places when the wind blew them astray. The girls leaned closer as if they could see the picture forming. Blossom smiled. "That sounds beautiful," she said. "Maybe tonight we'll help each other guide a few stars home." Buttercup picked a small pebble from the ground and tossed it lightly into the grass. "Or at least keep them company," she said, a voice half asleep. The night deepened, turning the sky a deeper shade of indigo. A faint glow from the farmhouse kitchen window blinked out, leaving only the moon and stars. The stillness grew thicker, but never heavy. It was a blanket, not a wall. Blossom stretched, her bow catching a glimmer of moonlight. "I think we've walked enough for now," she murmured. "Maybe we should rest, so we'll have strength for whatever comes next." Bubbles lay back, folding her arms behind her head, and Buttercup rolled onto her side with a yawn she tried to hide. Courage lowered himself onto the blanket, nestling between them. Their warmth pressed in from both sides, steady and safe. Overhead, the windmill kept its slow song. The lights of the three heroines dimmed until they were only gentle outlines, and Courage's breathing settled into an easy rhythm. The world beyond their little circle seemed to fade, leaving only stars, grass, and the quiet promise of friendship. Together they sank deeper into the hush, a soft companionship holding them in place as the night began to tip toward dreams. The night was almost completely still now, only the faint creak of the windmill and the slow rise and fall of 4 quiet breaths moved through the air. Moonlight spilled across the blanket in silver pools, softening every edge. Bubbles shifted first, turning so she could look at Courage. Her smile was drowsy but warm. "You did really well tonight," she whispered. "You followed the music even when you weren't sure where it would lead." Blossom nodded, brushing a speck of grass from her bow. "That's real bravery," she said gently. "It isn't loud or flashy. Sometimes it's just showing up step by step until you find the kindness waiting for you." Buttercup stretched one arm over her head, her voice low and calm. "You got heart, pup. Big heart." She let her arm fall back to the grass, eyes half closed. Courage felt their words settle inside him, like tiny stars finding their places in the sky. He curled his paws under his chin and allowed a long, quiet sigh to slip out. The tremble that had followed him from the farmhouse was gone, replaced by a steady warmth. Above, the stars seemed closer than ever, shining with an easy patience. The moon watched from its place above the horizon, draping silver light over the four of them. The breeze carried the faintest thread of the melody due, Ida, Ed, now softer than a heartbeat, a reminder of how their meeting had begun. Bubbles lay back and pointed lazily at the sky. "Look," she murmured, "there's one that looks like a sleepy dog." Blossom followed her gaze and smiled. "And another like a bow." Buttercup gave a small chuckle. "I see a frying pan again," she said, though her voice was already fading toward sleep. Courage's eyes grew heavy as he watched the constellations they invented together. He felt the weight of the night settle over him, not as a burden, but as a blanket. The grass beneath him was cool and steady, the blanket above warm with shared lights. Blossom spoke one last time, a hush in her voice. "We'll stay here a while," she said, "until morning touches the hills. When you wake, you'll know we were real, and that this quiet courage you found will stay." Courage gave a tiny nod, eyelids drooping. He nestled closer to the three girls, letting their soft lights mingle with the moon. The world around them faded into a single, gentle glow. The windmill's turning slowed to a lullaby's end. A cricket sang a sleepy final note and fell still. Somewhere far away, the farmhouse sighed in its sleep. Courage closed his eyes at last. He felt safe, small but strong, wrapped in friendship and moonlight. As dreams began to gather, he heard the melody one more time. Do, da, di, carrying him into peaceful sleep. Now the beloved little dog meets the professor. Morning came slowly to nowhere, a quiet hush before the first hint of gold touched the fields. Courage stirred, stretching each paw one at a time. The Powerpuff Girls were already awake, their soft glows replaced by the warm colors of dawn. Blossom offered a reassuring smile. "Good morning, Courage," she said, voice still wrapped in the calm of night. "Ready to meet someone special?" Bubbles pointed toward a small shape on the horizon, a trim, round-topped car puttering across the sand. Its engine purred like a happy cat. At the wheel sat a kindly figure in a white coat and thick glasses. He waved as he approached. The professor stepped out, careful with his teacup, and adjusted his spectacles. "Ah, there you are, girls, and this must be Courage." His words were as gentle as the steam curling from his mug. "I thought a bit of morning tea and a look around the lab might suit us all." He led them down a narrow path behind the windmill. The sun was rising fully now, spilling a quiet gold over everything. At the end of the path, tucked behind a low ridge, stood a squat little building Courage hadn't noticed before. Its roof gleamed like polished copper, and thin chimneys released threads of white steam. Inside the professor's laboratory felt nothing like the strange places Courage had crept through in old adventures. Here shelves of gadgets and tools glowed under soft lamps. A kettle hummed on a wide wooden counter. There was no rush, no harsh clang of machinery, only the comforting tick of small gears and the scent of fresh tea. Come in," the professor urged, setting cups on a table covered with blueprints and bolts. "Don't mind the clutter. These are just friendly projects." Bubbles floated over a workbench where tiny machines were stacked like toys. One looked like a lantern with wings. Another resembled a teacup that poured itself. She gasped, delighted, but kept her voice to a whisper so as not to wake the quiet of the room. Buttercup leaned against a stool, picking up a gadget shaped like a sleepy owl. "What's this one do?" she asked. "Ah, that," the professor said with a small chuckle. "It's supposed to hoot you back to sleep if you wake too early. Still a prototype." He set it gently aside and poured tea for everyone, even Courage, whose cup was a sturdy little bowl. Courage sniffed the steam, then lapped carefully. Warmth spread through him down to his tail. The professor watched with kind curiosity. "I've heard of your bravery, Courage," he said, "and I believe even brave souls deserve quiet tools to help them rest." They gathered around the table. The girls sipped their tea while the professor rolled out a sheet of parchment covered in soft pencil sketches. "This," he explained, "is my newest experiment, a dream harmonizer. It listens for worries at bedtime and hums back with steady notes to settle them." He tapped a small device sitting nearby, a silver sphere with tiny chimes inside. It gave a faint, mellow tone, like a lullaby from somewhere far away. Courage tilted his head, ears pricking at the sound. Bubbles clapped softly. Blossom leaned forward, eyes bright. "It's beautiful," she said. "Will you show us how it works?" "Of course," the professor replied. He adjusted a knob until the harmonizer released a warm shimmer of sound, low and soothing, filling the lab with calm. The lights on the walls dimmed in response, as if the whole room were breathing. They sat together, sipping tea and letting the music drift over them. Courage closed his eyes for a moment, safe between new friends, while gears ticked gently in the background. The professor smiled at the sight, a small circle of company wrapped in light, tea, and invention. Outside, the morning widened, but inside the laboratory, time seemed to rest, held by humming gadgets and the quiet promise of another peaceful adventure yet to come. The professor set his cup aside and brushed crumbs from the work table, clearing space between scattered blueprints. "Now," he said, smiling at Courage, "shall we see what these sleepy little contraptions can do?" He lifted a polished wooden box, opening its lid with a satisfying click. Inside rested a collection of miniature inventions, each no larger than an apple. Some ticked faintly, others hummed, and one gave off the scent of honey and warm bread. "This is my comfort kit," he explained. "Tools for nights when thoughts feel too heavy." He placed them on the table one by one, a lantern that cast shapes of drifting clouds, a spinning globe that whispered stories in tiny voices, and a silver bell that rang so softly it sounded like distant rain. Bubbles leaned close, eyes wide. "They're like toys," she whispered, "but gentle." Buttercup gave the bell an experimental flick and grinned when its chime washed through the room like a sigh. "Not bad," she said, settling back in her chair. Courage sniffed each object, tail giving shy wags. He paused at the globe. Ears perked as faint words floated from inside, murmured tales about hidden gardens and moonlit lakes. He leaned closer, and the stories shifted to soft barks and far-off laughter, as though the globe was reading his heart. Blossom tapped the dream harmonizer, resting at the table's edge. "Could we try linking them?" she asked. "Maybe the harmonizer could guide the stories, or the lantern could paint what the globe describes." The professor's eyes lit up behind his glasses. "Splendid idea, Blossom." He fetched a small brass cable, polished from years of use, and joined the inventions together. One by one, their lights bloomed, the lantern breathing pale clouds, the globe spinning out gentle tales, the bell humming in time. The laboratory glowed like a nest of starlight. Courage sat very still, paws planted, ears turned forward. The hum of the gadgets blended with the faint ticking of the windmill outside, becoming a single hush, a calm so deep it seemed to hold the room in its hands. The professor adjusted another knob, and a new melody rose, a cousin of the one that had called them through the night. Soft chimes settled into a steady rhythm, wrapping around them like a warm scarf. "Sometimes," the professor said quietly, "even clever minds need lullabies." He looked at each of them in turn. "Bravery is important, but so is rest. Without rest, bravery becomes only noise." Bubbles nodded, her hair falling forward like silk. "I love that," she said, her voice hushed. Buttercup gave a slow smile. Yeah, I guess even heroes should take naps. Blossom set her hands in her lap, the corners of her mouth curving up. It feels good to just listen, she admitted. Courage gave a soft whine of agreement and lowered his head onto his paws. The inventions kept humming, the lantern spilling quiet clouds across the ceiling. Shapes formed in the mist, sleepy hills, winding rivers, little stars wandering home. For a while, no one spoke. They stayed gathered around the table, bathed in the easy light of invention, tea, and friendship. Outside, a breeze stirred the copper roof, but inside, everything remained steady, like a heartbeat at rest. The professor reached over and patted Courage gently between the ears. There now, he murmured. Nothing here that bites or startles, just tools to remind you how safe you are. Courage closed his eyes for a moment, sighing in contentment. When he opened them again, he saw Bubbles tracing a finger through the lantern's clouds, Buttercup leaning on her elbow, and Blossom sketching new ideas onto a scrap of paper. All of it felt like the beginning of a kind secret one, shared only in warm rooms on quiet mornings. The soft light from the lantern drifted higher, painting the ceiling with wandering clouds. They floated slowly, like they were in no hurry to leave. The professor adjusted a dial on the dream harmonizer, and a warm pulse shimmered through the room. The clouds began to glow with hints of gold, then lavender, as though dawn and dusk were gently shaking hands. Courage lifted his head, ears swiveling at the sound. A faint ripple of music rose from the harmonizer low notes, sweet and steady, wrapping around them like a quiet ribbon. The girls leaned closer, their eyes reflecting the gentle light. Every mind has its own rhythm, the professor said, voice softer than the ticking gears. This device listens for that rhythm and gives it something kind to follow. He looked toward Courage. Would you like to try it, my friend? Courage blinked, uncertain, but Bubbles gave an encouraging nod. It's really nice, she whispered. Just listen. The professor placed a small cushion in front of the harmonizer. Courage stepped onto it, paws sinking into the soft fabric. The sphere gave a little sigh, then released a slow melody la-dee. The same gentle notes that had led him through the night. Courage's eyes widened. His tail began a tiny, thoughtful wag. Blossom smiled. It remembers you, she said. Maybe it's telling you the story isn't over yet. The harmonizer brightened, and images drifted into the mist above the table. Sketches of the hill they had crossed, the silver path of moonlight, and the windmill turning beneath the stars. The scenes pulsed with the music, fading in and out like sleepy memories. Courage gazed upward, mesmerized, his worries nowhere to be found. Buttercup rested her chin in her hand, her usual sharpness mellowed. That's, actually really cool, she admitted. Like a scrapbook for the heart. The professor chuckled, pouring a last splash of tea into his cup. A calm mind can build bridges between moments, he explained. When we let ourselves be still, the good things line up and show how they fit together. Bubbles touched the sphere lightly. Can it show what comes next, she asked. The professor shook his head gently. Not quite, he said. But it helps us listen so carefully that we notice the next good thing when it arrives. Courage settled deeper onto the cushion, the images now shifting to new scenes. The professor's lab under moonlight, a garden lit by tiny lanterns, and a path stretching into warm fields. Each picture felt like an invitation rather than a command, an open door rather than a push. Blossom closed her notebook and laid it on the table. Maybe the next good thing, she said, isn't about where we go. Maybe it's about staying right here for a while. The girls nodded, and the professor gave an approving smile. That, he agreed, is often the truest adventure. For a long, calm moment they stayed together, letting the harmonizer hum its steady lullaby. Tea cooled in forgotten cups, and the little machines around the room joined in with their own soft clicks and sighs. Courage felt the warmth of companionship, the kindness of quiet, and the easy promise that there would always be gentle places to return to. The hum of the gadgets softened until it felt like part of the morning itself. Sunlight slipped through the round windows, touching the wood of the work table and catching in the glass jars along the shelves. Dust motes drifted in the beams, slow as feathers. The professor carefully turned a knob on the dream harmonizer, and the pictures in the mist faded one by one, leaving only a last image of 4 friends gathered under moonlight. Then the cloud melted into clear air. "That will keep the memories safe," he said, smiling at Courage. "You can visit them any time you want, just by remembering how they felt." Bubbles closed the lid of the lantern, sealing its calm glow inside. Buttercup gave the sleepy owl a gentle pat, making its wooden eyelids droop as though it, too, was ready to rest. Blossom stacked the blueprints neatly, her movements small and unhurried. Courage rose from the cushion, stretching, his paws making soft taps on the floor. He felt lighter than when he had entered the lab, as though the harmonizer had untangled a few quiet knots in his heart. He wagged his tail once, shy but steady. The professor poured the last of the tea into his own cup, sipping with satisfaction. "A fine bit of tinkering," he said. "But every good session ends with fresh air. Let's carry this stillness outside before the day grows busy." They stepped through the door into the brightening morning. A breeze rolled across the sand, warm now, carrying the faint scent of clover and clean metal from the lab. The windmill turned lazily, its creak blending with the bird's song, waking along the fence. The 4 companions stood for a moment just beyond the threshold. Bubbles reached up, letting sunlight pool in her palms. Blossom closed her eyes, face turned toward the sky. Buttercup folded her arms, but couldn't hide a little grin. Courage sat between them, ears forward, tail flicking once in quiet approval. The professor looked at them, hands tucked behind his back. "Whatever comes next," he said gently, "remember that calm is a tool you carry with you. It helps you see what's kind, even in the strangest places." Courage glanced up at the girls. They smiled back, each glow touched by daylight now instead of moonlight. Together they began walking slowly toward the farmhouse, their shadows stretching behind them across the sand, not hurried, not worried, simply moving with the rhythm of a day just waking. As they passed the windmill, its blades caught the sun and sent little sparks of gold across the ground, as if the night had left a handful of stars behind. Courage paused to look, then trotted after his friends, the breeze ruffling his fur. The professor followed at a gentle pace, humming to himself the same 3 notes that had first led Courage out into the moonlight. Doop, dop, dee. And so they left the laboratory, carrying its warmth with them, ready for whatever small adventure the quiet morning and nowhere might bring. Now they were nearly at the farmhouse when a breeze rolled across the plains, a breeze so smooth it felt as though someone had brushed velvet against the sky. The professor paused, tilting his head. "Ah," he murmured, "that's an odd current for such a quiet day." Courage sniffed, ears flicking. The breeze carried a faint scent, like roasted peanuts and old notebooks. Blossom and Bubbles looked at one another. Buttercup frowned, though not in anger, more in curiosity. Then far off along the horizon, a thin shape wavered in the light. It bobbed once, twice, then seemed to float toward them. As it drew nearer, the shape resolved into a familiar figure. Short, round, wrapped in purple, with a helmet gleaming in the sun. A very tired Mojo Jojo was making his way across the sand, clutching something in his hands. The girls tensed at first, old habits from many adventures, but this Mojo looked different. His stride was slow, almost careful. His head drooped under the weight of his cap, and instead of muttering schemes, he seemed to be mumbling words that the wind snatched away. Bubbles shaded her eyes. "Is he yawning?" she asked softly. "Seems so," Blossom replied, voice calm but watchful. "Let's wait." Mojo stopped a few paces from the group. He drew in a long breath, the kind people take before saying something they've practiced in their minds. His voice, when it came, was quieter than any of them had ever heard. "I have come," he said. "Toto, apologize." The words seemed strange on his tongue, but he didn't flinch from it. "Last night, while the moon was up, I built a machine meant for mischief. But the stars kept looking down at me, and I felt—" He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I felt very tired of being the one who always makes trouble." Courage blinked, tilting his head, tail frozen, mid-wag. The professor gave a small nod, as though he'd expected this visit all along. Mojo held out what he'd been carrying, a small satchel of gears and parchment. "I thought maybe the professor could help me turn this invention into something gentle," he continued, voice dropping lower still. "Something that lets my mind rest instead of race." Blossom stepped forward, her smile patient. "That's a brave thing to admit," she said. "We can listen." Mojo let out a breath he'd been holding. The wind smoothed his cloak around him, softening its usual sharp folds. For the first time since they'd met him, his posture looked light, almost sleepy. The professor motioned toward the farmhouse porch, where Muriel's empty rocking chair sat waiting. "Why don't we sit a while?" he suggested. "We'll hear what our friend has to say, and perhaps have another cup of tea." They walked together to the shade of the porch. Mojo moved slowly, keeping his eyes on the sand. Courage trotted alongside, curiosity winning over caution. Bubbles hummed a tiny tune, easing the quiet. Buttercup watched them both, her stance relaxed but steady. When they settled, the rocking chair creaked softly as the professor set down a tray of warm mugs. Mojo lowered himself to the step, clutching the satchel in his lap. He looked at the friends gathered around him, then down at his hands. "I'm not sure how to start," he said, a voice barely above a murmur. "But I think maybe I don't want to build plans for chaos today. I want to build something that helps me slow down." The words hung there, tender and uncertain, as the breeze curled through the porch rails, carrying the scent of tea and early sunlight. The porch was quiet except for the slow creak of the rocking chair and the gentle chime of cups being set on the table. A ray of morning light slid between the rails, pooling at Mojo's feet. He stared at the warm patch of sun for a long moment, as though drawing courage from its stillness. "I was working late," Mojo began at last, his voice a hushed rumble. "I had built another device, an energy collector, a whirlwind of schemes." He shook his head slowly. "But as I watched the moon climb higher, I felt tired. Not the kind of tired where you sleep and wake the same. A tiredness that sits in the middle of your chest." Courage tilted his head, understanding more than words. He gave a soft whine of encouragement. Mojo's fingers brushed the edge of his satchel. "I kept thinking, maybe my inventions could help people rest instead of stirring trouble." He drew out a small bundle wrapped in fabric and placed it carefully on the step. "So I made this. It's a sleep spinner. It takes the buzzing thoughts inside a head and spins them into slow circles." Bubbles leaned closer, eyes shining. "That's such a sweet idea," she said softly, careful not to startle him. Buttercup raised an eyebrow, but kept her tone warm. "Looks a lot less scary than the stuff you usually bring around." Blossom reached for the bundle, unwrapping it slowly. Inside was a delicate frame of silver wires, no bigger than a teacup saucer. A crystal hung at its center, catching slivers of light. Thin threads stretched from the frame, each tipped with tiny bells no louder than the breeze. The professor adjusted his glasses, peering at the invention. "Remarkable," he said. "You built a machine meant for calm. That's a clever turn, Mojo." Mojo scratched at his chin, eyes lowered. "I don't know if it will work," he admitted, "but I want to try. I am weary of chasing loud plans." He paused, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I am ready to learn something quieter." Courage padded a little closer, nose twitching as he sniffed at the spinner. He gave a tentative wag, then looked up at Mojo with round, approving eyes. The gesture made Mojo's shoulders ease just a fraction. The professor poured more tea, setting a cup beside Mojo's satchel. "Why don't we give this a gentle trial?" he suggested. "Invention is best tested among friends." Blossom nodded, cradling the sleep spinner in her hands as though it were a fragile bird. "We can set it here on the porch," she said. "Let's see how it hums in the morning air." Bubbles clapped softly, delighted. Buttercup leaned back against a post, crossing her legs in an unhurried sprawl. Courage settled at their feet, tail wrapped neatly around himself. Mojo took a slow sip of tea, his eyes following the steady hands arranging his device. For a moment he said nothing, only breathed in the scent of leaves and wood and quiet companionship. A faint wind brushed the porch railings, making the little bells on the spinner give their first shy ring a note so soft it seemed to hover in the sunlight. Mojo's gaze softened. "I never thought I would sit here like this," he said almost to himself. "But perhaps a morning spent building peace is better than a lifetime of noise." The others smiled, and in the calm between words, a feeling settled the sense that a new kind of day had begun. One where even an old villain could rest, share tea, and let a hopeful plan take root. Sunlight leaned a little further across the porch, brightening the wooden planks and catching on the crystal at the center of Mojo's invention. Blossom placed the sleep spinner carefully on a low table, adjusting its frame until it stood steady. The little bells gave a faint chime as they settled. Mojo watched, hands folded in his lap. For a moment he looked almost shy, as though the soft breeze might blow the plan out of his hands if he wasn't careful. The professor leaned forward, his white coat brushing the step. "All right," he said warmly. "The design is sound balance here, crystal there. I suspect a single turn will set it in motion. The important part is to keep everything unhurried." Bubbles crouched beside the table, her hair glowing gold in the morning sun. "Can I give it the first spin?" she asked, eyes wide. Mojo hesitated and then gave a little nod. "Gently," he said, a voice quieter than they had ever heard. Bubbles reached out with a careful finger and set the crystal twirling. It began to spin slowly, catching bits of light that danced over the porch rails. The silver wires hummed as if they'd found their own voice, and the bells released a sound like faraway rain. Courage's ears perked at the melody. He crept closer, sniffing at the shifting lights. A pale glow slipped over his fur, tracing the shape of his small shoulders. He let out a soft sigh, then sat down, eyes half-lidded. Blossom watched him, a smile blooming. "It's working," she whispered. Mojo tilted his head, studying the invention, with something close to wonder. "The motion is slower than I expected," he murmured. "But, it feels right." Buttercup propped her chin in one hand, relaxed despite herself. "Guess you finally built something that doesn't make smoke or sirens." The professor chuckled and poured a little more tea into Mojo's cup. Sometimes progress is quiet, he said. That can be the hardest lesson. The spinner's glow thickened, soft but steady, as if gathering their breaths into one calm rhythm. The crystal inside rotated lazily, throwing arcs of color across the porch ceiling. Each bell gave a gentle tone, a sleepy harmony that spread into the warm air. Bubbles leaned back against a post, eyes closing for just a heartbeat. It makes everything feel slower, she murmured, like the morning is stretching just for us. Mojo's lips curved into something halfway between a smile and an apology. I wanted to prove I could build more than commotion, he said. Maybe I needed to prove it to myself first. Courage padded toward him, tail brushing softly against the satchel. He rested his chin on Mojo's knee, a quiet approval, wordless but clear. Mojo blinked down at him, then placed one tentative hand on the dog's head. The touch was awkward but kind. The group stayed that way, gathered around the spinner, letting its hush seep into their bones. Even the breeze seemed to settle, content to move only when the little bells asked for it. Above them, a lone cloud drifted across the sun, softening the light into silver. The porch, the tea, the spinner, and the companions all felt stitched together by something simple. The wish to rest and to build something gentle out of a once restless morning. The crystal at the center of the spinner kept turning, slow as a feather caught in a breeze. Light scattered from its edges, falling across the porch in tiny constellations. Everyone leaned a little closer, drawn by the hush that seemed to widen around them. A faint shimmer rose from the spinner's frame, thin as mist. At first it was only a cloud, but soon shapes began to appear within it, memories painted in quiet strokes. There was the moonlit hill they'd crossed the night before, the warm light of the professor's lab, the windmill shining silver against the dark. Each picture hovered for a heartbeat, then faded gently as another took its place. Bubbles gasped softly. It remembers, she said. It's showing everything we've shared. Blossom's smile deepened. It's giving us our own story, she murmured, but not rushing through it, just letting it unfold. Courage tilted his head, eyes wide. In the glow, he saw himself padding through the sand, the Powerpuff Girls floating above, the professor waiting with tea. He gave a low please sound and sat a little taller, ears flicking in delight. Mojo stared at the visions with a strange expression, part surprise, part something softer. I didn't design it to do that, he admitted. I only meant for it to calm the mind. The professor leaned back in his chair, content. Sometimes an invention has wisdom of its own, he said. Perhaps it knows that calm grows stronger when we see the good we've already lived. Buttercup raised an eyebrow, though there was warmth behind her look. So it's a memory machine now? Not bad for a guy who used to build banana lasers. Mojo gave a sheepish shrug, then let out a low chuckle. Maybe even a villain wants to remember the times he felt welcome. The shimmer shifted, now painting the present. The porch bathed in sunlight, and the spinner turning, friends gathered close. The image felt as alive as the moment itself, as if the device were quietly saying, "Stay here. This is worth keeping." Courage edged nearer to the spinner, peering into the moving light. His reflection blinked back at him, haloed by colors. He wagged his tail once, then rested it on the warm boards. Around him, the girls and Mojo settled deeper into their seats, content to watch the slow parade of calm memories. Above, the breeze stirred the bells, setting off a hush of silver tones that wrapped the pictures like ribbon. Each chime felt like a promise. Nothing was hurrying them. There was time to breathe, to watch, to to simply be. Mojo let out a long breath, shoulders dropping. "I think," he said slowly, "I like seeing mornings this way. Maybe I could build more of these." Blossom gave him a steady look. "Start with this one," she said. "Let it be enough for today." Mojo nodded, eyes still on the gentle scenes blooming in the mist. "Enough," he agreed. And with that single word, the spinner settled into its quiet rhythm, spinning memories and sunlight together until the whole porch seemed made of stillness. The pictures from the spinner drifted more slowly now, as though they too were growing drowsy in the warmth of the day. Courage watched one last image, the windmill at dawn dissolve into the sunlit air, leaving only the steady turning of the crystal. Mojo sat with his back against the porch rail, cup of tea balanced carefully on his knee. He looked smaller than before, his usual storm of words replaced by an easy hush. "I built so many things to prove I was clever," he said quietly, "but none of them ever gave me this quiet." Bubbles nodded, tracing a finger over the edge of the table. "Maybe you were meant to invent calm all along," she said. Blossom leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on her lap. "What you've done today is important," she said. "You decided not to make noise, you made space." Buttercup tilted her chair back just enough to see the yard. "Yeah," she added, voice softer than usual. "Feels like you finally got a gadget worth keeping." Mojo allowed himself a small smile, one that reached his eyes. "Perhaps," he murmured. "But I don't want it to end here." He looked at the professor. "Would you teach me how to keep working on it, carefully, without turning it into something wild?" The professor set his cup down with a pleasant clink. "I'd be honored," he replied. "Invention is a patient craft, especially when the heart behind it has learned patience too." A breeze stirred the spinner, setting the bells to a faint, thoughtful chime. Courage gave a quiet bark of approval, then curled against the step near Mojo's feet. The little dog's calm presence seemed to seal the moment. They began to talk about possibilities, not in hurried bursts, but in gentle ripples. Bubbles suggested tiny spinners for children who had trouble falling asleep. Blossom imagined one large enough to hang in the professor's lab, guiding late-night thinkers into rest. Buttercup said nothing at first, then shrugged and suggested a model strong enough to survive a tumble from a porch railing. Mojo listened, a hand resting lightly on Courage's back. "I don't want to lose what this feels like," he said. "It's quieter than I ever thought I could be." Blossom gave him a steady look. "Then protect it," she said simply. "You've made something soft. Don't let old habits rush it." He nodded, the smile lingering. The morning sun slipped higher, washing the yard in gold. Even the windmill's creak seemed to match the spinner's easy rhythm, as if all of nowhere had agreed to move more slowly for a while. Courage stretched and rested his chin on his paws, tail thumping once before going still. Around him, his new friends shared ideas and small laughter, their words drifting through the porch like the scent of tea. They didn't hurry toward answers. They didn't need to. The plan to build quiet instead of commotion was already alive, humming inside a sleepy little machine, and the hearts gathered around it. The sun had climbed higher, spilling a honey-colored glow across the yard. The spinner turned lazily on the table, its last bells swaying with a faint hush, as though it too was ready to rest. Mojo watched it for a long moment, then looked at the friends around him. His voice, when it came, was steady and low. "I think," he said, "that I don't want to chase chaos anymore. At least, not today." Blossom smiled, a quiet approval in her eyes. "One calm day can change the rest," she said. Bubbles leaned over and gently closed the spinner's frame so its bells stopped with a soft click. We'll keep it safe, she whispered. For mornings like this. Buttercup stretched, standing up with an easy yawn. Guess we should head inside before the tea turns cold, she said, though her tone carried warmth rather than impatience. The professor rose, brushing crumbs from his coat. We've all earned a slow breakfast, he said. And perhaps a bit more tinkering later, only if we keep our hands as gentle as our hearts. Courage hopped down from the step and gave a short, contented bark. He looked at Mojo, tail wagging once, an unspoken invitation. Stay with us if you'd like. Mojo bent to scratch lightly behind Courage's ears, the motion clumsy but kind. Perhaps I will, he murmured. I have not felt this peaceful in a very long time. Together they carried the spinner back into the house. Sunlight spilled through the open door, touching the wooden floor and the quiet gadgets along the walls. The professor set the device on a shelf near the dream harmonizer, where it gleamed like a small promise. They gathered around the kitchen table, sharing the last of the warm tea and a plate of sweet rolls Muriel had left cooling on the counter. Conversation drifted softly between them, memories, ideas, a few sleepy jokes. No one felt the need to fill every silence. The pauses themselves seemed part of the story. When they stepped outside again, the day had opened wide, but the calm stayed with them, a hush woven into their steps, a reminder in the light that kindness could be built, just as surely as any invention. Mojo stood for a moment at the edge of the porch, cloak lifting in the mild breeze. He looked back at the friends who had welcomed him, then at the horizon where the plains shimmered under the sky. For the first time in memory, his shoulders felt light. Courage trotted over, nudging him toward the path. The girls followed, laughter soft as feathers on the air. The professor closed the door behind them, humming the spinner's melody a tune that would follow them gently wherever they went. And so they set off across the yard, a small group stitched together by tea inventions and the quiet bravery of an apology. The morning stretched ahead, calm and generous, waiting for whatever tender adventure might come next. By the time the sun slipped behind the hills, the little group had settled into a quiet rhythm. The day had stretched soft and unhurried, tea in the kitchen, slow talk about gentle inventions, Courage napping with one paw over his nose. Now the yard outside the farmhouse glowed with the last amber threads of daylight. The professor stood on the porch, lantern in hand, adjusting its wick until a warm halo bloomed against the boards. "A clear night," he murmured. "Perfect for stories." Bubbles twirled in the cool air, leaving traces of silver light. Blossom gathered a blanket from Muriel's chair and spread it across the steps. Buttercup brought a tray with mugs of warm milk, steam curling like pale ribbons. Mojo hesitated at the doorway, then stepped out, holding the sleep spinner carefully in one hand. Courage followed them, tail giving an easy wag. He leapt onto the blanket and turned a slow circle before lying down, eyes half closed but watchful. They settled around the lantern, a small circle stitched together by its glow. Above, stars began to bloom in the deepening sky, quiet and sure of their places. The windmill groaned once, then settled into a patient hush. The professor looked at them all, his eyes reflecting the light. "We've spent today making calm," he said. "But there is another kind of strength, the kind that shows up when things are hard. Tonight we might share the moments that taught us about courage and kindness." Bubbles nodded eagerly, then softened her voice to match the quiet. "I know a story," she said. "It's about the first time we helped a bird who couldn't fly." She told them about a stormy afternoon in Townsville, about finding a sparrow trembling under a bench. They had sheltered it with their capes, drying its feathers and singing until it calmed. "It wasn't about saving the whole city," she finished. It was just helping someone tiny feel safe. Courage's ears perked. He let out a pleased whine as though he understood exactly what she meant. Blossom rested her hands in her lap, gazed steady on the lantern. "One," she said. "I was nervous about leading a mission at night. Everything looks sharper in the dark. But I learned that bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to move gently through it." Buttercup sipped her milk, considering. "I used to think courage meant punching the biggest thing around," she said at last, tone quiet but honest. "But sometimes it's staying calm so someone else doesn't panic." Mojo listened, turning the spinner slowly between his fingers. Its tiny bells gave a delicate ring. "Perhaps," he said, a voice rough with thought, "the bravest thing I've done is admit I wanted peace more than plans." He looked at Courage, then down at the lantern. "It is not easy to stop being what everyone expects." Courage gave a little bark, then pressed himself closer to Mojo's side, a silent pledge of understanding. The professor smiled, his gaze sweeping over them. "Kindness," he said, "is a lantern we hold for each other when the path feels dark." He raised his cup. "Tonight we hold it together." The stars above shimmered as if to agree, their light falling in gentle stripes across the porch. The group stayed there, wrapped in stillness, ready to listen to whatever lessons the night might whisper next. The lantern's flame danced softly, casting shapes against the porch rail. Beyond it, the sky deepened to velvet blue, stars pricking through one by one. A hush settled over the group, the kind that invites gentle words. Blossom tucked her legs beneath her and gazed at the constellations. "There was a time," she began, "when we tried to help a frightened kitten stuck on the roof of Town Hall." Her voice was calm, steady. The wind was sharp, and the roof felt so high. But I kept telling myself, one step, one breath. That was enough to bring her down safely. Bubbles hugged her knees, smiling at the memory. "She purred so loudly once we reached the ground," she added. "Sometimes bravery is just holding steady until someone feels safe." Buttercup leaned back against a porch post, the brim of her shadow cutting across the boards. "Mine's different," she said quietly. "I once met a little boy who thought he had to act tough all the time. We sat on a swing set for hours, not saying much, just sitting there, letting him know it was okay to be scared." She glanced at Mojo. "Even tough ones need room to breathe." Mojo shifted, eyes on the sleep spinner resting near his boots. The tiny bells gleamed faintly. "I have built 1,000 things meant to be loud," he said. "But one night, I built a box only to hold quiet thoughts. I never showed it to anyone. I suppose I was afraid people would laugh." He gave a small sigh. "Perhaps courage is protecting the gentleness inside yourself." Courage rolled onto his back with a soft groan, paws waving lazily before he settled against Mojo's leg. His eyes blinked slowly, calm and trusting. The professor leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When I was young," he said, "I tried to invent a perfect alarm clock. It clanged terribly." He chuckled, then grew thoughtful. "But one evening my grandmother told me I didn't need perfection. I only needed to try with kindness toward myself and my work. That lesson has lasted longer than any invention." A breeze slipped around them, cool and light. The windmill gave a slow turn, its blades brushing moonlight across the yard. The sleep spinner answered with a faint chime, weaving the stories together like threads. Blossom reached out, giving Mojo's arm a gentle pat. "Your box of quiet thoughts. Maybe it belongs with the spinner," she said. "A reminder that calm inventions can be as brave as any hero." Mojo looked at her, then at the little device, and nodded once a careful, thoughtful gesture. The porch settled deeper into stillness. They weren't rushing toward a lesson. They were letting the stories build their own rhythm, as calm as the night around them. The lantern's light reached a little farther now, brushing pale gold across the boards where they sat. Beyond the porch, the land of nowhere stretched wide and silver, every tuft of grass holding a drop of starlight. Courage lay half on his side, half against Mojo's knee, eyes sliding closed but ears still turning toward every voice. The spinner gave a quiet ring like a heartbeat wrapped in bells. Bubbles spoke next, voice almost a whisper. Once we met a little girl who was scared to start school. She clung to her mom so tightly she almost floated away with worry. Bubbles' smile softened. I sat with her in the doorway until she decided to take one step inside. That one step was huge. Blossom nodded, folding her hands over her lap. Leadership isn't just about plans, she said. It's about noticing when someone needs a hand, even something small like sharing a pencil or saving a spot at the table can change how brave someone feels. Buttercup stared out at the stars, voice quiet but firm. I used to think kindness meant letting people walk all over you, she admitted. But it's really about strength, choosing to stay gentle when it would be easier to lash out. Mojo turned the spinner between his fingers, the crystal catching pinpricks of moonlight. I've built shields, traps, alarms, he murmured, but never anything that protected softness, not until today. Perhaps the hardest courage is believing we can be more than what we were yesterday. Courage yawned, a tiny sound that made everyone smile. He nudged Mojo's hand as if to say, "Yes, you can." The professor leaned back, looking over them with quiet pride. Kindness isn't a single act, he said. It's a thread that runs through everything we choose, how we speak, how we listen, how we sit together on a night like this. They let the words settle. The porch, the night, the windmill all seemed to breathe with them, slow and content. Blossom reached for the blanket and drew it a little closer around Courage and Mojo. Everyone here has been brave in their own way, she said gently. Tonight we see that bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Courage blinked drowsily, tail sweeping once across the boards. The group felt stitched together by an invisible thread. Quiet stories, steady stars, and a choice shared by each of them to meet the world with care, even when fear tries to push through. The windmill sighed again, steady as an old lullaby. Somewhere beyond the fields, a night bird trilled once, then fell silent, as if to honor the calm gathering on the porch. The porch lay wrapped in moonlight, soft as fleece. Everyone's stories still hovered in the air, like warm breath on a cool evening. The spinner glowed faintly at Mojo's side, its bells quiet but awake, as if waiting for another voice to join. Courage lifted his head from Mojo's knee. His eyes, wide and dark, wandered across the circle from Blossom's steady smile to Bubbles' kind gaze, then to Buttercup, whose calm nod invited him on. The professor rested his hands on his knees, patient. Even Mojo sat still, giving the little dog space. Courage swallowed once, then made a low, trembling sound. It wasn't a bark exactly, but a small, thoughtful murmur. He took a breath, paused, pressing gently into the blanket, and tried again. This time the sound stretched a little longer, carrying a quiet story in its rise and fall. Blossom leaned closer, listening. "Tell us, Courage," she said softly. "Whatever it is, we're here." Encouraged, Courage spoke in his own language, part whimper, part tiny growl, part soft sighs. He told of nights when the wind outside the farmhouse sounded too big, and he had stood guard anyway, shaking but staying close to Muriel's chair. He spoke of times he'd helped frighten visitors even while his own heart raced. And he shared how, sometimes, he simply curled at someone's feet so they wouldn't feel alone. Bubbles wiped a little mist from her eyes. "You've been brave so many times," she said gently, "even when nobody noticed." Buttercup's lips curved into a half-smile. "Yeah, pup," she murmured. "That's the kind of courage that lasts, the quiet kind." Mojo tilted his head thoughtful. "I see," he whispered. "Even the smallest soul can hold more strength than 100 inventions." The professor reached over, smoothing a hand along Courage's back. "Bravery," he said, "often looks like this. A heart that keeps showing up, no matter how small the steps." Courage's ears twitched. He gave a tiny wag and rested his head on the professor's knee. Around him, the circle leaned in slightly as though to keep his story safe. Blossom draped the blanket further around him, tucking its edge beneath his paws. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It takes a lot to share." The spinner hummed again, releasing a tender light that curled around them all. It caught the edges of their faces, weaving them together in a soft ribbon of silver and gold. Above, the stars watched in patient silence. The night itself seemed to settle, proud of the little dog who had just spoken with all the courage his heart could give. The porch felt warmer after Courage's quiet story, as though the lantern's glow had seeped into everyone's hearts. The spinner sent a single ring into the air, then settled, leaving a hush so pleasant no one hurried to break it. Blossom was the first to speak, her tone soft and steady. "Tonight reminds me that courage isn't always loud or bold," she said. "Sometimes it's just the choice to keep moving with kindness, even when the dark feels close." Bubbles nodded, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Kindness is a kind of bravery, too," she said. "It means opening a door, even if you're scared it might close. It means believing someone's heart is worth a little risk." Buttercup leaned back on her elbows, gazing at the stars. "I used to think bravery meant charging at the hardest thing around," she admitted. "But maybe it's standing still long enough for someone else to find their footing." Mojo rested a thoughtful hand on the spinner. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "the bravest invention is not a machine at all, but the decision to change one's path." His eyes softened as they met Courage's. "Even for an old monkey like me." Courage gave a soft grunt, tail brushing the boards. He looked from one friend to the next, a small pulse of pride glowing behind his eye. The professor lifted his mug, though it held only the faint scent of milk now. "What I hear tonight," he said, "is that bravery and kindness grow together. They keep each other strong, and sometimes," he glanced at Courage, "they're at their truest when nobody's watching." The breeze moved through the porch again, cool and sweet. It toyed with the blanket draped around Courage, brushed the edges of Mojo's cloak, and stirred Bubbles' hair so that it gleamed under the stars. Blossom wrapped her hands around the lantern, steadying its flame. "These stories are like little lights," she said. "We can keep them with us, and they'll help us when the next shadow comes." Bubbles leaned forward, smiling at Courage. "And if you ever forget how brave you are, we'll remind you." Buttercup gave a slow nod. "We all remind each other," she added, her voice unusually tender. Mojo sat quietly, shoulders no longer tight. For once there was no rush to build or prove, just a calm acceptance that he was part of something gentle. The spinner gave another faint chime, as if to close the lesson. Above, the constellations stretched wide, carrying their own quiet wisdom. Everyone breathed in, letting the air taste of night, friendship, and something softly new inside their chests. The stars had climbed high, bright but tender against the dark. The lantern on the porch burned low now, its glow soft as candlelight. Around it sat the little gathering Courage nestled under the blanket. The Powerpuff Girls leaning shoulder to shoulder, Mojo resting with the spinner in his lap, and the professor smiling quietly over them all. For a long time no one spoke. They simply breathed together, letting the cool night breeze brush their faces. The windmill turned once, a slow hush across the yard, then stilled again. Blossom looked around the circle, her voice barely more than a murmur. "I think the lesson tonight," she said, "is that bravery and kindness are best when they travel side by side." Bubbles tilted her head, her hair catching the last flicker of the lantern. "Even the tiniest kindness can make a scary place feel safe," she said. Buttercup stretched her legs and crossed them again, a lazy grin tugging at her lips. "And sometimes," she added, "the scariest thing is letting people see you care. But it's worth it." Mojo glanced down at the spinner, its bells gleaming faintly. "Perhaps I will make more things like this," he said quietly. "Machines that remember gentle moments. Maybe that is my new mission." The professor nodded, pleased. "Whatever we build or choose, it matters that it helps someone feel less alone," he said. Courage gave a sleepy wag, eyelids drooping. He inched closer to the group, curling into the warmth they made together. A soft sigh left his chest, small but sure, and the spinner answered with a single, tender chime. The lantern's flame dipped, leaving a halo of golden mist. Above, the sky stretched wide, its stars steady as heartbeat lights. The porch, the blanket, the quiet companions, all of it felt woven into one calm story. One by one, they settled more deeply. Blossom folding the blanket closer around Courage, Bubbles resting her head on Blossom's shoulder, Buttercup leaning back against a post, eyes half shut, Mojo tucking the spinner carefully beside him, the professor closing his eyes behind his glasses. No one hurried the ending. They let it arrive the way dusk becomes night, naturally, without fuss. The windmill's final creak sounded like a lullaby's last note, and the stillness that followed felt like a promise kept. Under that soft sky, with friendship close and lessons warm in their hearts, they drifted toward rest. The spinner's faint glow faded with the lantern's light, leaving only moon, stars, and the quiet truth they'd shared. That kindness makes courage gentle, and courage makes kindness strong. Courage gave one last contented sigh, tail twitching once. Then, surrounded by friends in silver starlight, he slipped easily into sleep, a little hero safe in the company of brave, kind hearts. The night had grown very still, wrapped in a deep blue that shimmered with silver dust. The lantern on the porch had burned down to a quiet ember, its circle of light fading as the stars above took over. Courage stirred beneath the blanket, blinking slowly. Around him, the friends remained settled in the easy hush they'd built together. Blossom's bow caught the faintest gleam of moonlight. Bubbles leaned against her shoulder, eyes half closed. Buttercup rested one elbow on her knee, gaze turned to the sky. Mojo sat with the spinner tucked safely in his cloak, while the professor sat straight but peaceful, as though carved from the calm itself. A breeze swept gently across the yard, carrying the faint smell of clover and the last whisper of tea. It stirred Courage's fur, cool but not cold, and made the windmill hum a sleepy note. Above them, the heavens were open wide, stars scattered thick as petals, the moon hanging like a lantern just for them. Blossom looked up, her voice no louder than the wind. "Look at all of them," she said. "Each one a small light keeping watch." Bubbles followed her gaze, a dreamy smile tugging at her lips. "When I was little," she whispered, "I used to pretend every star was someone cheering me on." Buttercup tilted her head, eyes soft in the glow. "I thought they were tiny sparks left behind by heroes," she admitted, tone uncharacteristically quiet. Mojo cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps," he said, "they are inventions, waiting to be built, ideas scattered across the sky." His words held no boast, only a thoughtful wonder. Courage lifted his head, ears twitching. The stars looked close enough to touch, patient and unhurried. He felt something steady settle in his chest, a warmth shaped like belonging. The professor adjusted his glasses, smiling faintly. "Stars remind us that even in a wide world, we're part of something bright," he said. "They keep stories safe until we're ready to tell them." They sat together for a long while, letting the constellations draw their quiet maps overhead. Every so often, a meteor traced a soft line across the darkness, like a friendly hand waving goodbye. Each streak faded gently, leaving the sky whole again. Blossom wrapped the blanket a little tighter around Courage. "Not every farewell is heavy," she murmured. "Sometimes it's just a thank you for what the night gave us." Courage pressed closer, tail sweeping lazily. He wasn't sad, only calm, like the earth had given him a new place to stand. Mojo leaned back against the porch post, eyes reflecting starlight. "This," he said, "is the kind of quiet I never knew how to find." He looked at Courage and the girls, his voice barely there. "Thank you for letting me sit in it." The professor let out a contented sigh. "We've all given each other something tonight," he said. "And that gift will stay, even after we go." Above them, the stars kept their patient vigil, spilling light across the porch and the friends who watched. The night waited, soft and generous, for the rest of their farewells. The stars hung steady above as if they too wished to hear every last word spoken on the porch. The lantern's glow had dimmed to a soft halo, just bright enough to touch each face with gold. Bubbles shifted against Blossom's shoulder, lifting her head. "I feel like the sky is holding us," she murmured. "Like it wants us to keep this calm." Blossom nodded, her bow trembling faintly in the night air. "We'll carry it," she said. "Even after we leave, it can stay with us." Buttercup glanced down at Courage, who was tucked warmly between them. "You're tougher than you look, little guy," she said, though her smile gave away the softness in her voice. "Don't forget that." Mojo turned the spinner slowly in his hands, the tiny bells catching moonlight. "Tonight," he said, "I learned I can choose quiet over schemes. That might be the best invention of all." His gaze rested on Courage, then the girls, gratitude written plain on his face. The professor leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I'm proud of every one of you," he said gently. "Bravery is a lantern you pass along, and tonight, each of you held it." Courage looked from one friend to the next, ears flicking. He felt the warmth of their words settle into him, tucking itself between the steady beats of his heart. For once there was no flutter of worry in his chest, only a calm readiness for whatever might come. Bubbles reached down to scratch behind his ear. "Whenever you look up," she whispered, "think of us. We'll be cheering even if you can't see us." Blossom laid a hand on Mojo's arm. "You're part of this circle now," she said softly. "Wherever you go, remember the quiet you found tonight." Buttercup stretched her legs out across the boards, letting out a slow breath. "Yeah," she said. "And don't wait until you're tired to ask for company." Mojo blinked slowly, nodding. "I won't," he promised. The spinner gave a single delicate chime, like a seal on their words. Somewhere across the yard, the windmill turned once, sending a shadow that slid gently across the grass. The group fell silent again, content to let the stars listen while they held on to the last moments of togetherness. Their hearts felt light, not because they were saying goodbye, but because kindness had given every farewell a gentle edge. The porch boards held the night's coolness as everyone lingered in their circle of light. Overhead, the sky stretched like a vast, quiet quilt, each star a small stitch holding it together. The windmill gave a slow sigh, nudging them toward the next moment. Blossom was the first to move. She stood carefully, gathering the blanket from around Courage and draping it over her arm. "We should let the night keep its rest," she said, her voice no louder than the breeze. "Morning will come soon." Bubbles sat up straighter, brushing her hair from her face. She looked at Courage with a smile that held no rush. "We'll see each other again," she whispered. "But tonight, you've earned every peaceful dream." Buttercup rose with an easy stretch, rolling her shoulders before giving Courage's ear a gentle ruffle. "Sleep easy, pal," she said, her usual edge softened by the dark. "You got more heart than most heroes I know." Mojo stood next, slower than the girls. He held the spinner against his chest as though cradling a fragile hope. He looked at Courage and the girls, a faint smile on his face. "This little thing," he said, giving the bells a careful tap, "will remind me to build peace, not plans." The professor remained seated a moment longer, savoring the calm he saw gathered around them. Then he rose too, brushing off his coat. "I think," he said, "that what we've made tonight isn't just a memory. It's a quiet promise to carry gentleness wherever we go." Courage shifted under the blanket, looking up at them with eyes bright against the darkness. He felt something new nestled deep inside, a warmth that wasn't fragile at all, but steady, like the ground beneath his paws. Bubbles reached down to stroke his head one last time. "Sweet dreams, Courage," she murmured. "Remember this sky." The lantern flickered once, its glow thinning, as if it too prepared for sleep. Around them, the stars gleamed brighter, their light falling in long, calm stripes across the porch. They all stood there for another breath, holding the stillness between them like a shared treasure. Nothing hurried. The night allowed each of them to choose the pace of goodbye. Blossom led the way off the porch, the hem of her dress brushing the grass as she walked into the silver light. The others followed slowly, their feet quiet on the worn boards. Out in the yard, the air smelled of clover and cool sand, and the moon poured a soft river of light across the ground. Bubbles spun once in the open space, letting her laughter drift up to the stars, a light, sleepy sound that faded as soon as it rose. She settled at Courage's side, giving him a fond pat. "Look how clear the sky is," she said. "It feels like it's cheering for you." Buttercup lingered near the porch steps, one hand tucked in her pocket. She gave a little nod toward the horizon. "That's your world out there," she said to Courage, "and you don't have to face any of it alone." Mojo placed the spinner on a flat stone near the windmill. Its bells glimmered faintly, catching bits of moonlight. "This belongs to the night now," he said quietly, "so that it can hum to us whenever we remember." The professor joined him, adjusting his glasses as he looked at the small device. "You've given this invention a home," he said. "Not in a workshop, but in a moment. That makes it stronger." Courage padded a few steps into the grass, tail swaying lazily. He looked from the spinner to his friends, then up at the moon. The sight filled him with a warmth that felt larger than fear, yet light enough to carry. Blossom approached him, placing a steady hand on his head. "This is where you can always return," she said softly. "To stars, to quiet, to the people who believe in you." Bubbles leaned close, whispering just for him, "You don't have to roar to be brave." Buttercup gave a little smirk. But if you do ever need to bark at trouble, she added, make it count. Mojo chuckled, a sound without sharp edges. Perhaps I will build a bell that rings only for kindness, he mused. Something to remind me of this night. The windmill turned once, creaking like an old friend saying farewell. A cool gust brushed their faces, not rushing them, but guiding them gently toward the next pause in their journey. Together they stood for a moment longer, shapes outlined in moonlight, bound by a quiet that felt like a promise. No one felt alone beneath the starlit sky. The group lingered in the yard, their faces soft in the moon's silver glow. The spinner rested on its stone, bells hushed, as if it too were listening to the quiet. Blossom turned to Courage, kneeling so their eyes were level. You've shown us something tonight, she said, that the smallest heart can hold the biggest kind of strength. She gave him a gentle scratch behind the ear, smiling when his tail brushed the grass. Bubbles crouched on his other side, her voice light as feathers. You've given us courage, too, she said. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that helps someone stand a little taller. Buttercup stepped closer, resting a hand on Courage's back for just a second. Keep this feeling, she murmured. Let it sit inside you, even when the world gets noisy. Mojo picked up the spinner, holding it carefully in both hands. I thought I would bring trouble to this place, he said softly. Instead, I've learned to leave with something gentle. He glanced at the professor, a question flickering behind his eyes. The professor gave an approving nod. Take it with you, he said. Carry tonight's quiet wherever you go, not as a burden, but as a steady lantern. Courage looked at them each in turn, tail giving a single, deliberate wag. He felt the quiet bloom inside him, firm and calm, like the roots of an old tree. Bubbles brushed a thumb across his forehead. Sweet dreams, little buddy, she whispered. Buttercup gave a brief salute, her smile lopsided but kind. Blossom drew the blanket around Courage once more, tucking the edges beneath his paws. Mojo set the spinner back on the stone, letting its bells settle in the moonlight. A breeze rustled through the grass, lifting a few stray petals from the clover patch. They twirled upward, catching the starlight before floating down again, a tiny dance of farewell. The windmill's arms turned slowly, casting moving shadows across the yard. Overhead, the stars seemed to lean closer, as if to bless the quiet gathering. No one rushed the moment. They stood together, breathing the same calm night, holding on to the sweetness of shared courage before letting it drift gently into memory. Moonlight lay across the yard like a soft quilt. The spinner's crystal caught the glow and sent a final glimmer across the grass before settling still. Around it, the little group shared one last breath together, no words, only the comfort of company. Blossom straightened, gathering the blanket from Courage's shoulders. She draped it carefully across her arm, then brushed a hand over his head. Rest well, Courage, she said, voice low. You've earned every quiet dream. Bubbles leaned close, her smile warm. We'll always be somewhere in the sky, she whispered. When you look up, you'll remember tonight. Buttercup gave him a playful wink. And if you ever need us, she said, just be brave enough to call. We'll hear. Mojo picked up the spinner and held it against his chest. Its tiny bells gave a single, sleepy note. I will keep this safe, he promised, so I don't forget the stillness we built. The professor stepped nearer, adjusting his glasses as he looked at them all. You've shared something rare, he said kindly. Carry it forward. Let it guide your steps, even when the road feels dark. Courage felt the warmth of their words seep into him, deeper than fur or bone. It settled in a place where fears used to rattle, leaving quiet strength behind. He gave a soft, contented bark, small but sure. One by one, they turned toward their paths, Blossom leading her sisters toward the horizon, their figures painted silver against the fields. Mojo walking slowly behind, the spinner glinting like a star he could hold. The professor paused at the farmhouse porch, lantern in hand, watching them go with a smile that spoke of trust. Courage remained for a moment longer, standing alone in the moonlit grass. He lifted his gaze to the sky where the stars gleamed steady and kind. The hush of the windmill and the memory of gentle voices wrapped around him like a soft scarf. At last he padded back to the porch, curling on the blanket they'd left behind. The boards were cool, but the night was warm with everything he'd learned, that bravery can be quiet and kindness can shine brighter than fear. He closed his eyes, tail making one last slow sweep. Above him, the stars watched over nowhere, patient and bright. And in their light, courage drifted into sleep, safe, steady, and full of quiet confidence. Sleepy, buddy, you've reached the end of tonight's journey. Courage, the girls, Mojo, and the professor have all found their quiet places beneath the stars, and now it's your turn. Close your eyes and let the calm of nowhere settle over you. Feel how soft the night can be, how steady your own heartbeat is. All the warmth and kindness from this story are still here, wrapping you in safety. Breathe slowly and out. You don't need to hold on to anything from the day. The stars will keep watch, just as they did for courage. Good night, sleepy friend. May your dreams be gentle, your heart at ease, and your rest as deep and peaceful as a moonlit sky. Sleep well, SleepyToons loves you.